When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable-looking child ever seen. It was true, too. She had a little thin face and a little thin body, thin light hair and a sour expression. Her hair was yellow and her face was yellow because she had always been ill in one way or another. She was born in India. Her father held a position in the English government and had always been busy and ill himself. And her mother had been a great beauty, who cared only to go to parties and amuse herself with charming people. She had not wanted a little girl at all, and when Mary's born, she handed her over to the care of her ayah, who was made to understand that if she wished to please the Mem Sahib, she must keep the child out of sight as much as possible. She never remembered seeing familiarly anything but the faces of her ayah and the other native servants, and as they always obeyed her and gave her her own way in everything, because the Mem Sahib would be angry if she was disturbed by her crying, by the time she was 6 years old, she was as tyrannical and selfish a little pig as ever lived.
I want... Why did you come? I will not let you stay. Bring my ayah to me.
Missy Sahib, she cannot.
Bring my ayah to me now. Pig! Daughter of pigs! Why do people keep rushing past the door? And my ayah was always here when I woke up before. Everything is strange this morning. Perhaps I'll go out into the garden. Now this flower can go in this little heap of earth, and this flower in this one. Stay up! And over here, and I'll have my own little garden. The Mem Sahib. She looks so frightened. I wonder what they're saying.
Is it so very bad? Oh, is it?
Awfully, Miss Lennox. You ought to have gone to the hills 2 weeks ago.
Oh, I know what I ought. I only stayed to go to that silly dinner party. What a fool I was. What is it? What is it?
Someone has died. You did not say it had broken out among your servants.
I did not know. Come with me.
After that, appalling things happened, and the mysteriousness of the morning was explained to Mary. The cholera had broken out in its most fatal form, and people were dying like flies. The ayah had been taken ill in the night, and it was because she had just died that the servants had wailed in the huts. Before the next day, 3 other servants were dead, and others had run away in terror. There was panic on every side and dying people in all the bungalows. During the confusion and bewilderment of the second day, Mary hid herself in the nursery and was forgotten by everyone. Nobody thought of her, nobody wanted her, and strange things happened of which she knew nothing. She only knew that people were ill and that she heard mysterious and frightening sounds. Finally, Mary slept. Many things happened during these hours, but she was not disturbed by the wails and the sounds of things being carried in and out of the bungalow.
It's so still. I've never known it to be so still before. I wonder if everybody got well of the cholera. Maybe all the trouble is over. I wonder who will take care of me now the ayah has died. I suppose there will be a new ayah, Perhaps she will know some new stories. But when? When will someone come and take care of me? When people have the cholera, it seems that they remember nothing but themselves. But if everyone has got well again, surely someone will remember and come to look for me. What? Oh, it's just a little snake. It has eyes like little jewels. There it goes under the door. Even it is in a hurry to leave here. How queer and quiet it is. It sounds as if there was no one in the bungalow but me and the snake.
What desolation, that pretty, pretty woman.
I suppose the child, too. At least I heard there was a child, though no one has ever saw her.
Barney, there's a child here.
What?
A child alone in a place like this?
Mercy on us. Who is she?
I am Mary Lennox. I fell asleep when everyone had the cholera, and I have only just wakened up. Why does nobody come?
It is the child no one ever saw. She's actually been forgotten.
Why was I forgotten? When will my new Aya come?
Aya?
She means nurse. That's the word in the local language.
Why does no one come?
Poor little kid. There is nobody left to come.
It was in that strange and sudden way that Mary found out that she had neither father nor mother left, that they had died and been carried away in the night, and that the few native servants who had not died also had left the house as quickly as they could get out of it, none of them even remembering that there was a Missy Sahib. That was why the place was so quiet. It was true that there was no one in the bungalow but herself and the little rustling snake.
Now, you mustn't be anxious. We're going to make sure that you're being taken care of.
Why wouldn't I be?
Well, because of your parents' passing, of course. But not to worry. Until we know precisely what their wishes were for you, you're going to stay with Reverend and Mrs. Crawford. Lovely people, very good hearts. And they have 5 young children near your age, so you'll have lots of playmates. Won't that be nice?
I never had playmates before.
Yes, well, I'm sure you'll like it. In any case, you'll stay with them for a little while, and then once everything is, settled, you'll go to live with someone else. That is, with whoever they, Well, here we are.
Oh, hello. You've come.
Yes, ma'am.
And this must be Miss Mary.
Hello.
Mary, this is Miss Crawford that I told you about. Here are her things.
Oh, thank you. Mary, why don't you go and play with the other children in the side yard over there?
Very well.
They said you found her alone?
I'm afraid so, ma'am.
Mary did not know where she was going to live, but she knew she wasn't staying with the Crawfords, and she didn't want to. She hated their untidy bungalow and the way the shabbily dressed children quarreled and snatched toys from each other. She was so disagreeable to them that after the first day or two, nobody would play with her. By the second day, they had given her a nickname which made her furious. It was Basil who thought of it first. Basil was a little boy with impudent blue eyes and a turned-up nose, and Mary hated him. She was playing by herself under a tree just as she had been playing the day the cholera broke out. She was making heaps of earth and paths for a garden, and Basil came and stood near to watch her. Presently, he got rather interested and suddenly made a suggestion.
Why don't you put a heap of stones there and pretend it is a rockery? There, in the middle.
Go away. I don't want boys. Go away.
Well, you don't have to... I know what to call you. Mistress Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? with silver bells and cockle shells and marigolds all in a row.
Stop it!
You are going to be sent home at the end of the week, and we're glad of it.
I am glad of it too. Where's home?
She doesn't know where home is. It's England, of course. Our grandmama lives there, and our sister Mabel was sent to her last year. You are not going to your grandmama. You have known. You're going to your uncle. His name is Mr. Archibald Craven.
I don't know anything about him.
I know you don't. You don't know anything. Girls never do. I heard Father and Mother talking about him. He lives in a great, big, desolate old house in the country, and no one goes near him. He's so cross, he won't let them, and they wouldn't come if he would let them. He's a hunchback, and he's horrid.
I don't believe you.
And she turned her back and stuck her fingers in her ears because she would not listen anymore, but she thought of it a great deal afterward.
She knew so little of her mother. She can't be expected to have loved her very much, or miss her now that she's gone.
I don't believe she misses her at all, my dear, although how can we know? She seems to have no particular emotion on the subject, or at least is determined not to show any.
Heavens no. When I told her this morning that she was going to live with her uncle, she was as stone-faced as a statue. I tried to kiss her on the cheek last night when I tucked her into bed, and she just turned her face away.
Likewise, I tried just patting her on the shoulder on the way out this morning when I hugged the other children, and she held herself stiff as a poker. I don't believe she's ever had any real affection before.
She is such a plain child, and her mother was such a pretty creature. She had a very pretty manner, too, and Mary has the most unattractive ways I ever saw in a child. The children call her Mistress Mary quite contrary, and though it's naughty of them, I can't help but understand it.
Perhaps if her mother had carried her pretty face and her pretty manners oftener into the nursery, Mary might have learned some pretty ways too. It is very sad, now the poor beautiful thing is gone, to remember that many people never even know that she had a child at all.
I believe she sincerely never looked at her. When her ayah was dead, there was no one to give a thought to the little thing. Think of the servants running away and leaving her all alone in that deserted bungalow. Colonel McGrew said he nearly jumped out of his skin when he opened the door and found her standing by herself in the middle of the room.
My goodness, just imagine.
Since she had been living in other people's houses and had had no ayah, she begun to feel lonely and to think queer thoughts which were new to her. She began to wonder why she had never seemed to belong to anyone, even when her father and mother had been alive. Other children seemed to belong to their fathers and mothers, but she had never seemed to really be anyone's little girl. She had had servants and food and clothes, but no one had taken any notice of her. She did not know that this was because she was a disagreeable child, but then, of course, she did not know she was disagreeable. She often thought that other people were, but she did not know that she was so herself. Mary made the long voyage to England under the care of an officer's wife, who was taking her children to leave them in a boarding school. She was very much absorbed in her own little boy and girl, and was rather glad to hand the child over to the woman Mr. Archibald Craven sent to meet her in London. Her name was Mrs. Medlock, and she was Mr. Craven's housekeeper. She was a stout woman with very red cheeks and sharp black eyes. She wore a very purple dress, a black silk mantle with jet fringe on it, and a black bonnet with purple velvet flowers which stuck up and trembled when she moved her head. Mary did not like her at all, but as she very seldom liked people, there was nothing remarkable in that. Besides which, it was very evident Mrs. Medlock did not think much of her.
My word, you're a plain little piece of goods, aren't you? We have a long train journey ahead of us, so I suppose I may as well tell you something about where you're going to. Do you know anything about your uncle?
No.
Never heard your father and mother talk about him?
No.
They never told you about your uncle?
They never told me about anything.
Humph. I suppose I should try to prepare you. You're going to a queer place. Not but that it's a grand big place in a gloomy way, and Mr. Craven's proud of it in his way, and that's gloomy enough too. The house is 600 years old, and it's on the edge of the moor, and there's near 100 rooms in it, though most of them's shut up and locked. And there's pictures and fine old furniture and things that's been there for ages, and there's a big park round it, and gardens and trees with branches trailing to the ground, some of them, but there's nothing else.
Mary had begun to listen in spite of herself. It all sounded so unlike India, and anything new rather attracted her. But she did not intend to look as if she was interested. That was one of her unhappy, disagreeable ways. So she sat still.
Well, what do you think of it?
Nothing. I know nothing about such places.
But you are like an old woman. Don't you care?
It doesn't matter whether I care or not.
You are right enough there. It doesn't. Why, you're to be kept at Misselthwaite Manor, I don't know, unless because it's the easiest way. He's not going to trouble himself about you, that's sure and certain. He never troubles himself about no one. He's got a crooked back. That set him wrong. He was a sour young man and got no good of all his money and big place till he was married.
He was married?
To your father's sister. She was a sweet, pretty thing, and he'd have walked the world over to get her a blade of grass she wanted. Nobody thought she'd marry him. But she did. And people said she married him for his money. But she didn't. She didn't. When she died.
Oh, did she die?
Yes, she died, and it made him queerer than ever. He cares about nobody. He won't see people. Most of the time he goes away, and when he's at Misselthwaite, he shuts himself up in the west wing and won't let anyone but Pitcher see him. Pitcher's an old fellow, but he took care of him when he was a child, and he knows his ways.
Shut up in a house with 100 rooms.
You needn't expect to see him, because 10 to 1 you won't. And you mustn't expect that there will be people to talk to you. You'll have to play about and look after yourself. You'll be told what rooms you can go into and what rooms you're to keep out of. There's gardens enough. But when you're in the house, don't go wandering and poking about. Mr. Craven won't have it.
I shall not want to go poking about.
And she turned her face toward the streaming panes of the window of the railway carriage and gazed out at the gray rainstorm, which looked as if it would go on forever and ever. She watched it so long and steadily that the grayness grew heavier and heavier before her eyes, and she fell asleep.
You have had a sleep. It's time to open your eyes. We're at Thwaite Station, and we've got a long carriage ride ahead of us.
A carriage stood on the road before the little outside train platform. Mary saw that it was a handsome carriage, and a well-dressed footman helped her in. When he shut the door, mounted the box with the coachman, and they drove off. The little girl found herself seated in a comfortably cushioned corner, but she was not inclined to go to sleep again. She sat and looked out the window, curious to see something of the road over which she was being driven to the queer place Mrs. Medlock had spoken of. She was not at all a timid child, and she was very exactly frightened, but she felt that there was no knowing what might happen in a house with 100 rooms nearly all shut up, a house standing on the edge of a moor.
What is a moor?
Look out of the window in a few minutes and you'll see. We've got to drive 5 miles across Misselthwaite Moor before we get to the manor. You won't see much because it's a dark night, but you can see something.
It's not the sea, is it?
No, not it. Nor it isn't fields nor mountains. It's just miles and miles and miles of woodland that nothing grows on but heather and gorse and broom, and nothing lives on but wild ponies and sheep.
I feel as if it might be the sea. If there were water on it. It sounds like the sea just now.
That's the wind blowing through the bushes. It's a wild, dreary enough place to my mind, but there's plenty that likes it, particularly when the heather's in bloom.
I don't like it. I don't like it.
There's the house up ahead. Mostly dark, but I'm glad to see that bit of light twinkling. It's the light in the lodge window. We shall get a good cup of tea after it, at all events.
The entrance door was a huge one, made of massive, curiously shaped panels of oak, studded with big iron nails and bound with great iron bars. It opened into an enormous hall, which was so dimly lit that the faces in the portraits on the walls and the figures in the suits of armor made Mary feel that she did not want to look at them. As she stood on the stone floor, she looked a very small, odd little figure in black, and she felt as small and lost and odd as she looked.
You ought to take her to her room. He doesn't want to see her. He's going to London in the morning.
Very well, Mr. Pitcher. So long as I know what's expected of me, I can manage.
What's expected of you, Miss Medlock, is that you make sure that he is not disturbed and that he doesn't see what he doesn't want to see.
Come along, girl. Well, here you are. This room and the next are where you'll live, and you must keep to them. Don't you forget that.
It was in this way Mistress Mary arrived at Misselthwaite Manor, and she had, perhaps, never felt quite so contrary in all her life.